Hi, welcome to episode 37 of The Comic Source. I'm your host, Jace. Back at home in the studio. This will probably be the final episode I can record here in this studio. Maybe I can do one more, and then I'm going to be moving to another state. So, as I mentioned, just kind of bear with me if some episodes come out a little later than I plan, or if I don't have a cool comic wall behind me. So, I trust you viewers will keep tuning in anyway. Just a couple quick news items I want to mention. Fox has announced a return of The X-Files, the beloved weird sci-fi series from the 90s. So the original stars are going to return, as is the original creator, Chris Carter. 6-episode special limited miniseries, so I'm sure all you fans of The X-Files out there are very happy to hear about this. In movie news, DC just released a picture of Jesse Eisenberg as Lex Luthor. Completely bald, black and white, looking very serious. And Zack Snyder has come out saying that this version of Lex Luthor is going to be different from any version we'd seen previously, so look forward to that next year in Superman vs. Batman, Dawn of Justice. And in some comic news, Marvel has announced 2 of the members of the new Avengers book that's going to start up after Secret Wars finishes. This post-Secret War Avengers team so far has 2 female members, the new Teenage Miss Marvel and the new female Thor. So it has me wondering if it's going to be an all-female team or what. So over the next 5 days, I imagine the other 5 members will each be identified and will know what to look for once Secret Wars is over as far as the Avengers lineup is concerned. Meanwhile, over at DC, they released an interactive image of the Convergence crossover. I'll put the link down here. You guys can go and check it out, get a little information about what worlds exactly are going to be seen in Convergence. Now on to the books I'm going to cover for this week, Wednesday, March 25th. The first book I want to mention is the series finale of the newest Ghost Rider series by Marvel. That's issue 12. This issue was written by Felipe Smith, with Smith and Chris Anka on art duties and Val Staples handling the colors. It was a pretty enjoyable wrap-up for the series, which has seen the new character of Robbie Reyes possessed by this serial killer, this hitman who clearly is a bloodthirsty, vengeful spirit. And I felt like the art early on the series with Tradd Moore just wasn't a good fit. But with Anka and Smith handling the art, I feel like the series was vastly improved. The storytelling from panel to panel was excellent. Good colors, good pacing, good dialogue. There's a few ethnic references here and there, but it doesn't feel forced. Definitely an enjoyable series. Ghost Rider's always been one of my favorite Marvel characters, kind of one of those second-tier characters that flew under the radar, with probably his most popular era being during the early 90s with the Daniel Ketch version. However, I don't know how I feel about Ghost Rider driving a car. For me, he should be on a flaming motorcycle. That being said, the way Smith ended the series certainly leaves it open for a return for Robbie Reyes, and I would be interested to see where he goes from here. The characters are believable, and Reyes really caring for his younger brother, and the supporting characters, both Reyes' boss and his female love interest, come across as very believable also. So a fairly enjoyable series. Not the best selling. I'm not surprised it's ending with issue 12, but I expect we'll see more of Robbie Reyes and this version of Ghost Rider in the future. Okay, the next Marvel book I'm going to talk about is Big Thunder Mountain Railroad. For those of you who've been to Disneyland in Southern California, you know that's actually one of the rides there, and I imagine they probably have a version over in Disney World in Florida too. So this was a very enjoyable story. It was written by Dennis Hopeless, with art duties handled by Ty Walker, and colors by Jean-Francis Bellou. Part of the Marvel Disney Kingdoms series of books they've been putting out, and the setting is the Big Thunder Mountain, which has a railroad in it, and it's actually a giant mine. We meet the protagonist of the series, Abigail, or Abby Bouillon, whose father owns the mine, and she seems to be the kind of girl who's very headstrong. She certainly doesn't listen to her father, heed his advice, or follow his rules. So she's in this mining town out west. It's the Wild West. She gets herself in trouble right away. The series ends on a little bit of a cliffhanger. It's enjoyable so far. I feel like it would be a good gateway comic. It certainly is suitable for all ages. And if you're a child or someone you know is interested in comics and is a fan of Disneyland, I feel like this would be a great comic. It would make a great bedtime story. The writers have a good handle on spinning a great Western tale. Alright, the next book I'm going to talk about is Flash number 40, co-written by Robert Venditti and Van Jensen. Brett Booth handles the pencils, Norm Ratman is on inks, and Andrew Dahlhaus is on colors. So this is finally the resolution of the story arc that's been going on in Flash for the last 5 or 6 issues. Barry Allen manages to return to Central City from the Speed Force. There's lots of action, pretty much from cover to cover. The action is non-stop. At the end of the issue, Barry is left in sort of a new status quo going forward. And also the image on the very last page was something that has me anxiously anticipating issue 41 come June. I've said before that I think Flash is one of the series that DC's putting out that's sort of flying under the radar. I don't hear a lot of people talking about it, and to be honest, I'm not sure why. Venditti and Jensen are showing what makes Barry Allen such a heroic and legendary character in the DC universe. Meanwhile, Brett Booth and Norm Ratman are absolutely killing it on the art, and the colors by Andrew Dahlhaus just help that art just jump off the page. It feels very dynamic, very kinetic. The action scenes are some of the best done in comics today, and I recommend this book to everybody. It really is an awesome, traditional superhero comic, and I can't wait to see where it goes next. But I will say I don't necessarily expect to see much of the future Flash going forward, which is kind of a disappointment because I really loved that blue and yellow whitish look of him with the energy crackling off of him. Maybe we'll see a return of the future Flash Barry Allen sometime in the future. And I should also mention that one of the best things about Flash going forward is this dream team of creators is still going to be together come June when issue 41 comes out. They certainly gel well together. They have a great chemistry when it comes to creating an awesome story and an awesome world for Barry Allen to inhabit, and I hope they stay together for a long, long time. The next DC comic I want to talk about is one I've mentioned before. It's Spangled War Stories featuring G.I. Zombie. This book is written by Jimmy Palmiotti and Justin Gray, and it's fully painted by Scott Hampton. It's very unfortunate that this book is ending. I really got a sense with issue 8 that Jimmy and Justin had a lot more stories to tell. 1 through 8 was one complete story arc, and it was not at all what I expected, and it was thoroughly enjoyable from start to finish. There was maybe just a little spot in the middle where I felt like it was a tiny bit rushed, but that may be just because Jimmy and Justin were trying not to leave too many loose ends. That being said, it is a story and a character that could continue at some point down the road, and I, for one, would love to see it return. The way Jimmy and Justin wrapped everything up, the pacing, the action was just amazing. Some really believable characterization going on, some intriguing characters, and we didn't get to learn much throughout the series about G.I. Zombie's background, and that's something I definitely would want to see explored in the future. Just to give a brief synopsis, it's basically the story of a zombie who works as kind of a black bag agent for the U.S. government, and in this series 1 through 8, he's going after some militia that have actually taken samples of his blood and his body and made sort of a nerve gas or a toxin that turns everybody who inhales it into zombies themselves. And this zombie, G.I. Zombie Jared, who works for the U.S. government, along with the secret agency he works for, have to find out just how far spread this organization is and find a way to stop it just in the nick of time. So when I heard the title originally, Spangled War Stories starring G.I. Zombie, I expected it to be a war comic. It's not that at all. Or if you want to look at it as a war comic, it's much more war of the modern world, urban terrorism, and these militia groups that even today have the U.S. government worried. So very relatable, very relevant, and at the end of the day, what I've come to expect from Jimmy Palmiotti and Justin Gray, a very, very good story. The issues probably aren't very expensive. You probably can find them at a convention relatively cheaply, or certainly the trade will come out and collect probably all 8 issues, maybe 9 issues with the Future's End issue that came out. I certainly recommend picking it up. The art by Scott Hampton, painted, very much suits the mood of the book, makes Jared the zombie look sufficiently menacing when he needs to be, but Scott Hampton also does a great job conveying emotion and handling the action scenes extremely well. Definitely a fun book. Go out, pick it up, give it a try. The next book I want to mention is Invincible from Robert Kirkman's Skybound imprint. Issue 118 came out today. If you can find it at your local comic shop, it's only 25 cents, or you can get it digitally for free. So there's absolutely no excuse not to read this book. Kirkman has made it a very easy jumping on point. That's why the low price point, and the book starts out with a recap of the entire series up till this point. Now, as I said, it is issue 118, so it's not exactly a detailed synopsis of the entire series, but it gives you an overall feel and you understand who the main characters are and where they're coming from. And those of you that are familiar with Robert Kirkman from The Walking Dead know what a great writer he is. Invincible is no different. That's not to say it's similar to Walking Dead, other than just like Walking Dead, the writing is excellent. This was an extremely fun issue with a new status quo for the character Invincible going forward, but at the same time extremely poignant with some of the things that Invincible and his girlfriend are having to deal with because of some things that happened in the recent past. So Kirkman did a great job of balancing both the fun part, the recap, the poignancy of some of the things that Invincible's going through. And then on the last page, he put in a huge cliffhanger that I hope ensures anybody who picks this book up is instantly going to be hooked. So great job by Kirkman, great job on the art by Ryan Ottley, and solid color work by Jean-Francois Bellew. I've heard a lot of people compare Invincible in the past to early issues of The Amazing Spider-Man, and I can kind of understand that in that he's a teenage hero, and he definitely deals with a lot of real-life issues. I don't know that Invincible will ever reach the popularity or the widespread notoriety of Spider-Man, but it's certainly worth reading. And as I said, if you're a fan of Kirkman's Walking Dead, this is the book you should be reading. I know a lot of the issues, the previous issues, have been collected in big omnibuses or trade paperbacks. So pick up 118 if you haven't read Invincible before and try it out. With the recap that Kirkman put in there, I don't know that it's necessarily required to go back and pick up those trades or omnibuses and catch up to this point. But after you read it 118 and see how good the story is, you may just be inclined to do that. But I think it would be just as easy to pick up 118, read it. If you enjoy it, keep reading going forward. You don't really need to know everything that's happened in the past, being that it looks like a new status quo for Invincible going forward. And now the next book I'm going to talk about is my book of the week for this week, and that's The Valiant #4 from Valiant Comics. I wasn't originally sure what my book of the week was going to be. I usually kind of have an idea ahead of time what it's going to be just based on what my expectations are and what I'm really looking forward to. But then I started reading all these books, G.I. Zombie, The Flash, Invincible, and I was thinking to myself, wow, I'm going to have a really hard time picking the book of the week. And I actually didn't read The Valiant until last. I saved it for last because it's the finale of the series and I wanted to be able to savor it. So I read 15 to 20 other books first, and as I said, I was worried about what I was going to pick for book of the week. I was thinking maybe I'd have to pick 2 or 3, and then I read The Valiant and I needn't have worried. This book blew everything else out of the water this week. There were so many great books that came out this week, but yet when I read this, there was no doubt The Valiant 4 book of the week. This book is written by Matt Kindt and Jeff Lemire. The art is handled by Paulo Rivera, and the colors are by Joe Rivera. So, I've talked about The Valiant before. It's basically the story of the Eternal Warrior, Gilad, who's an immortal, protecting the Geomancer, who's kind of the Earth's avatar that walks among the living and tries to protect the Earth from evil. Well, there's an antagonist in the story called the Immortal Enemy, and he's kind of both the antithesis of the Eternal Warrior and the Geomancer rolled into one. He basically comes into being every millennia or so, and his job is to destroy or kill the Geomancer and launch the Earth into a new dark age. The Eternal Warrior to this point has never been able to save a Geomancer from being killed, so he pretty much calls on all the superheroes and all the resources of the Valiant universe to try to save the current Geomancer. I certainly won't give away what happens because it did not go at all as I expected, but it did show just how heroic the character Bloodshot is in the Valiant universe. And for those of you not familiar with Bloodshot, we don't know that much about his background. What we do know is he's a human soldier who's been imbued with nanites, these microscopic machines in his blood that allow him to heal from just about any wound imaginable, and they give him superior speed, strength, reflexes, just all sorts of powers, as well as being able to communicate with machines. So as I said, the story really showed the heroism of Bloodshot. It showed an incredible characterization and relationship developing between Bloodshot and the Geomancer. And with the Bloodshot Reborn series coming out next month, it's going to be interesting to see how the Geomancer goes from where she was at the end of this series to where we expect to see her in the Bloodshot Reborn series. We've seen some preview pages of that, and I'm not sure how those two reconcile together. I'm certainly a big fan of Bloodshot. I can't wait for Bloodshot Reborn, and so it'll be interesting to have that question answered. But if you haven't read any Valiant books to this point, I normally recommend The Harbinger to jump on, but being that this is only 4 issues, and being that this series was so incredibly good, if you're interested in Valiant at all, that this series, the 4-issue series titled The Valiant, is where you should start. The art by Paulo Rivera is extremely good. The characterization, the facial expressions are done beautifully, great rendering, good colors by Joe Rivera. I just can't say enough about what an amazing book and an amazing series this was. Although I have multiple copies of each of the 4 issues, I definitely plan on picking up the hardback deluxe edition when it comes out. The story was that good. So do yourself a favor, if you only pick up one book this week, make sure it's the Valiant issue 4 from Valiant Comics. So just a few other key issues, in my opinion, that came out this week that I'll mention really fast. Darth Vader number 3, written by Kieran Gillen, with art by Salvador LaRocca and colors by Edgar Delgado. This series has continued to improve with each issue. I wasn't impressed with issue 1, didn't really like it. 2 was slightly better. 3 has me intrigued. I'll probably keep reading Darth Vader just based on the strength of issue 3. And I've heard a lot of rumors that issue 3 is already jumping up in price. It may be because of the new character that was introduced in issue 3. So hopefully you'll be able to find a copy at your local comic store, or you can just grab it digitally. The other title I want to mention from Marvel that came out today was Nightcrawler number 12. This is the finale of the series by Chris Claremont with art by Todd Knock and colors by Rochelle Rosenberg. Again, the finale of a series that I feel wasn't necessarily ready to end, much like G.I. Zombie. There was a little part in the middle that felt a little rushed. I felt like Chris Claremont and Todd Knock had a lot more stories to tell, but I feel like maybe they had to squeeze in a few things to try to not leave any plot threads dangling. They did a very admirable job. The first half of the book wraps up almost everything that we've seen in the series up till this point, and then they have a few pages left over to kind of give us a new status quo and let us know where exactly they're leaving Kurt Wagner or Nightcrawler in the X-Men universe going forward. A very enjoyable series. It's also recommended by me. Todd Knock's a great artist. Everybody knows what a legend Chris Claremont has been on X-Men for the majority of his career. So if you're a fan of adventure stories, space stories, swashbuckling pirate type adventures, Nightcrawler is certainly a book that you should pick up. A few DC books I'm going to mention. Justice League Dark number 40 is that series finale. It's written by J.M. DeMatteis with pencils by Andres Gonaldi, inks by Walden Wong, and colors by Chris Sotomayor. This was, I'd say, satisfying conclusion to the Justice League Dark. It left John Constantine as the only member remaining, basically, of the Justice League Dark. So I definitely think it will transition directly into the John Constantine Hellblazer series that's going to come out in July. And I expect to see a lot of other characters from Justice League Dark, Zatanna, Frankenstein Agent of Shade, Deadman, Swamp Thing, in the pages of either Mystic U or the Dark Universe going forward. But the star of this book was certainly John Constantine. I felt like he was the star all along, and it was a fitting end for the Justice League Dark, considering that Constantine was the star. Definitely sad, and definitely a book I'm going to miss, but certainly a good ending by DeMatteis. The last DC book I'm going to mention is Suiciders number 2, written by Lee Bermejo. Bermejo also handles the art with Matt Hollingsworth on colors. Now, Suiciders number 1 was my book of the week about a month ago, and 2 is just as good. The mystery deepens. It's a great character piece. It definitely has me ready to read the next issue as soon as I finish the current one. The world that Bermejo is creating is certainly a compelling one, and I can't wait to learn more about it. The art is absolutely gorgeous. Hollingsworth does a great job with the colors, setting the mood, and it's a perfect complement to Bermejo's gorgeous art. So, Suiciders number 2, I'm sure you can still find a copy of number 1 down at your local comic shop. Also a book I highly recommend. And a few independents I'm going to mention real fast. Pastaways number 1, written by Matt Kent with art by Scott Collins and colors by Bill Crabtree, is an interesting take on time travel. The characters have actually traveled back into the past over 1 million years, and they're here in the current day. Well, actually, I think it was 2014 that the first issue took place in. Very enjoyable. And also what Kent has done is in the very back of the book, there's sort of a travel log by one of the members of the team who's sort of the documentarian of the time travel team. And so that kind of gives us some insight into the way they see our world. Very enjoyable. I'll definitely be picking up issue 2. And finally, the last book I'm going to mention is G.I. Joe, Snake Eyes, Agent of Cobra, number 3. This has also been a very enjoyable series. This book is written by Mike Costa with art by Paolo Vanelli. And if you're a fan of the G.I. Joe cartoon way back when, you probably should be reading some of these G.I. Joe titles from IDW. That being said, they're much more sophisticated and much more enjoyable than those cartoons are, at least in my opinion. I've tried to go back and watch those cartoons at various times over the years, and they don't really hold up with adult me. They're not quite as good as I remembered as a kid, but there's a lot more depth and a lot more intrigue and more characterization in these G.I. Joe books that IDW is putting out now. Snake Eyes has always been a fan favorite, and if you're a G.I. Joe fan, you certainly should be picking it up. So thanks for joining me, everybody. Don't forget to go out and pick up Book of the Week, Valiant number 4. Join me next time when I do that spotlight on the small press publisher Dark Planet Comics and their creator-owned title, Silver. I'll see you then.